Okay, good morning. My name is Angel. I'm going to be talking about technology over the years from 1980 to 2020. So, my introduction is we all use technology whether we want to or not. Some are born into it, some are given no choice. And there's those of us that choose technology over everything. Some important questions are how technology has changed over the years, how it affects us today, and what life was like before technology was relevant. So technology is everywhere whether you want it to be or not. Some of us, like myself, were born right in the midst of it all, or at least when it started to evolve tremendously. But there is also those that were born in a time when things were all pencil and paper, and now they are required to use the technology in this day and age. But then there's also those of us that actually like the technology and root for the future of technology because it's a forever growing thing. With the rate of how quick it's still developed to this day, it will always grow and update as the years progress. Some say it's a bad thing, but the reality of it is that it's never going to go away. So technology begins as early as the 1960s with the invention of the internet, as stated in Mark Demlo's article, Information Technology in Libraries at 50, the 1980s in review. Although it hadn't made a difference until the 1980s when inventions were starting to make a come up. One of the first big breakthroughs were the use of technology in libraries, much like the kind we use today to find our resources. Although they weren't strict to only research, the technology was mostly used to look up and find books. And people did use them. Throughout the 80s, the use of technology in libraries rose, and that was a surprise for librarians, that so many people knew about it. By the end of the 80s, technology was beginning to become more familiar. Some of the most common used items were the Nintendo Game Boy in '89, although the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, was also a big deal in '86. The Game Boy was much more popular. There was also the VHS VCR, which was released in '76, but was a big deal throughout the 80s. And then there's the portable audio player, the Walkman, mostly used for playing music. During the next decade, from 1990 to 2000, technology skyrocketed. People started jumping at the use of any and everything that was technology-based, as well as the technology in libraries. Electronic resources were being used more in the 90s than in the 80s. This was because most things that needed librarian assistance had technology in its place. Much like life today, the 90s were the foreshadow of what we see today, just not as digital yet. People had cell phones and computers, mostly used for emails, which was also a new thing for everyone. People weren't using the VHS VCR anymore because the DVD had taken its place. Game consoles were being upgraded and released. The Nintendo 64 was released in '96, which was an upgrade from the NES and Game Boy. The first PlayStation had released in '94, which was the beginning of a new era in itself. Much like every other decade, technology kept upgrading, and the 2000s were no different, except the decade was much more technology-friendly than the 80s and 90s, which is likely considering how fast technology moves and makes changes. This was a decade of camera cell phones. Nowadays, cell phones are much more common, but if you can imagine, they were pretty new back in the 2000s. USB flash drives were becoming more common as well. It was new for things to be transferred from one device to another, especially being portable. USBs were actually released in the 90s, but hadn't been made popular until the 2000s because computers hadn't been made USB friendly until later in the 90s. Cars weren't USB friendly either until 2006. Wi-Fi was made in the late 90s as well, but wasn't able to be used by cell phones or other devices until 2004. After the 2000s hit, it seems like technology never quit upgrading. After 2010, Apple became a household item. With many devices being released since 2000, it wasn't until after 2010 that the first iPad was released. Compared to today, we have a variety of iPads, along with iPhones and iPods. We got the AirPods and Apple Watches, and that is just a few from Apple products. There's Android, Windows, Google, etc., to name a few from the decade. Social media has been made big since 2010 with Snapchat and Instagram being released in 2010. Twitter and Facebook has been around since 2004 and 2006, but with the new social media platforms, they have been made more relevant. More and more social media platforms release as the years progress. TikTok being released in 2016, but as time goes on and on, technology does too. Game consoles have been upgraded from the very first ones to this date. We have the PS5 released in 2020, the latest Nintendo console, the Switch, released in 2017. In between those, we had the PS1, PS2, PSP, PS3, and the PS4 for PlayStation products, just to name a few. Nintendo has made items that change drastically along with technology, from Game Boys to Nintendo DS's to Wii's, and each of those in itself has a list of consoles that have been upgraded over the years as well. Technology over the years has been one of the most ever-changing things to happen to humanity. It's been helpful and entertaining, life-changing to say the least. Yet it's different for every generation and every generation to come. There is no slowing down technology as more things are yet to come.